Pancake, everyone. Ladislaus Czizik-Chatari, an unrepentant Nazi. He was involved in the deaths of over 15,000 people and derived pleasure from beating women with a whip. The most horrifying part is that he managed to escape and possibly is still alive to this day. In this video, we will tell you about Nazis who evaded justice after the war. For instance, about Dr. Death, who peacefully passed away in his bed surrounded by his family. About war criminals who fled and continue to hide to this day. And also about the most intriguing theory that suggests that Hitler's right-hand man, just like Hitler himself, survived World War II. Franz von Papen's political career was long and convoluted. A veteran of World War I, he served in the parliament of his native Prussia for a long time until, in 1932, with the help of high-ranking colleagues, he became the head of the German government. It was during this time that he began his contacts with Hitler's party. Von Papen attempted to form a coalition agreement with the fascist party and offered Hitler the position of vice-chancellor. Those negotiations did not succeed, but they allowed the politician to establish some useful connections, including with the future second man of the Third Reich, Hermann Göring. Göring played a decisive role in von Papen's fate. After the National Socialist German Workers' Party's victory in the parliamentary elections, he helped the Prussian politician enter Hitler's government as vice-chancellor, and in 1934 he even saved his life. On June 17, 1934, Franz von Papen delivered a speech at Marburg University, criticizing Hitler's harsh policies. On June 30th, the Night of the Long Knives occurred, during which Hitler eliminated the top opposition within the party. Franz von Papen managed to survive only thanks to house arrest. Interestingly, his security was provided by the police directly subordinate to Göring. Nevertheless, the politician was removed from his positions and sent abroad for diplomatic work. From 1934 to 1938, he served as an ambassador to Austria, where he actively organized financial and political support for pro-German nationalist groups. In 1938, Austria came under German control, and Franz von Papen went to Turkey to work as an ambassador. It was this job that saved our character from inevitable punishment. By the way, it was at that time that Hermann Göring came to his aid for the last time. The highest-ranking defendant at Nuremberg took full responsibility for what happened in Austria, allowing his friend to receive an acquittal. Despite the acquittal in Nuremberg, none of the individuals mentioned above managed to escape full responsibility. In 1947, all of them came under investigation by the Denazification Commission as part of the process conducted by the victorious countries to cleanse German society. Fricke was sentenced to 9 years in prison, Schacht and von Papen to 8 years of forced labor. And now you will learn about a person who tried to escape punishment but couldn't. Doctor of Medicine Aribert Heim conducted experiments on humans at the Mauthausen concentration camp in 1942. He studied human pain thresholds and lethal doses of substances, administering lethal injections of phenol and gasoline to prisoners, performing amputations and castrations without anesthesia, and extracting internal organs. He was responsible for the deaths of 300 to 400 inmates. After the program was discontinued, he continued to work as a physician. After the war, Heim worked as a gynecologist in Austria until witnesses' testimonies led to a manhunt. In 1962, the sadist fled through France to Morocco and from there to Egypt. However, this was only discovered after his death from cancer in 1992. In Egypt, Aribert Heim adopted the name Tariq Farid Abdul, converted to Islam, pretended to be a photographer, and concealed his medical background. He lived in a hotel, obtained tax exemptions through a lawyer, and left a substantial inheritance. Apparently, everything was going well for him. Aribert Heim received the nickname Dr. Death for all his horrific crimes against humanity. The most horrifying part is that such a person escaped punishment. He died surrounded by family, unlike his experimental subjects who perished in agony. Perhaps cancer, which claimed his life, was the ultimate answer to all his atrocities. After hearing all these stories, you can't help but wonder how all these people who committed such horrendous crimes managed to escape punishment, and whether other Nazis could have escaped as well. All these questions have given rise to many conspiracy theories. Hjalmar Schacht became a prominent figure long before Hitler's rise to power. As early as 1923, he assumed position of president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, and implemented a series of highly effective financial and economic measures that halted hyperinflation and stabilized the national currency's exchange rate. Schacht's remarkable talent was combined with a strong character. His temperament led the financier to embrace Adolf Hitler's ideas, and in 1930 he resigned from his post as president of the Reichsbank. From that point forward, Schacht provided unwavering support to the future Führer, including building connections between him and major industrialists. It's not surprising that after Hitler's victory in 1933 parliamentary elections, Schacht once again became president of the Reichsbank and from 1934 served as Minister of Economics. In 1939, when the prospects of a global war became evident, Schacht sent a letter to Hitler pointing out that the government's policies would lead to the collapse of Germany's financial system and hyperinflation. Following this, he consistently spoke out against invading Poland and the USSR, resigned from his position as president of the Reichsbank, and left the government in 1942. These actions eventually led Schacht to become associated with anti-Hitler resistance and participation in the assassination attempt on the Führer on July 20, 1944. Schacht had only indirect involvement in the assassination plot, which spared him from execution. However, he spent the remainder of the war in Ravensbrück, Flossenburg, and Dachau concentration camps. In May 1945, he was liberated by the Allies, but immediately rearrested. The proceedings of the Nuremberg trials regarding Schacht's case were complex, but several factors played in his favor. In addition to his disagreement with and subsequent opposition to Nazi regime, Schacht's defense pointed out that he had never been a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Hitler's party. Summing up all the facts, the tribunal concluded that Hjalmar Schacht was not guilty. If Schacht managed to avoid punishment because he wasn't a party member, the next character was a member and even had close ties with the second most powerful person in the Third Reich. Alois Brunner was a key associate of Adolf Eichmann, a German officer and member of the Gestapo directly responsible for the mass murder of Jews. He was responsible for deporting Jews from Austria, Greece, France, and Slovakia to Nazi death camps, causing the deaths of over 160,000 people. Alois was sentenced in absentia by France. He miraculously managed to evade persecution. For many decades, he lived in Syria. The Syrian authorities refused to cooperate in Brunner's prosecution. The last time this terrible person was seen was in 2001. Born in 1912, his chances of still being alive are slim. However, there is no accurate information about his death. Perhaps even now, someone's grandfather responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of lives is sipping hot tea and enjoying nature. But the story of the next character will shock you. During the years of World War II, the Nazis killed many millions of civilians, 5 to 6 million Jews, nearly 2 million Poles, up to 6 million citizens of the USSR, 220,000 Romani people, hundreds of thousands of French, British, Greeks. Mass repressions, anti-partisan actions, bombings and raids became routine. People died from bullets and gas, bombs and shells, hunger, the unbearable burden of forced labor and medical experiments in concentration camps. Retribution was inevitable, but nobody wanted to pay such a price with their own lives. In the spring of 1945, thousands of officers and officials of the Third Reich prepared for a daring escape. The black market, old-fashioned bribery, and genuine sympathies of many Europeans for Nazi ideology worked wonders. A vast number of criminals managed to evade justice using what were called Ratlines. Through neutral Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, across the chaos-stricken Italy, the Nazis escaped to South America and North Africa. From there, they even infiltrated British colonies. The Ratlines led to Argentina, where the Nazis had their own newspaper, El Pampero, with a circulation of 75,000 copies. They went to Egypt, where German advisors would help rebuild the army. They covered their tracks and even brought killers back to West Germany. Thousands of theorists and practitioners of genocide escaped the tribunal and died in their beds. During World War II, Ladislaus Czizik-Chatari served as the chief of police for a ghetto located in the city of Kassa, which is now known as Košice and is located in Slovakia. Chatari was involved in the deaths of at least 15,000 Jews. According to documents held by the Wiesenthal Center, this individual derived pleasure from beating women with a whip, forced prisoners to dig frozen ground with their bare hands, and was involved in other atrocities. After the war, the reconstituted Czechoslovakia sentenced Chatari to death, but the criminal moved to Canada under a false identity, where he engaged in art trading. In 1997, Canadian authorities revoked his citizenship and began preparing documents for his extradition. This story illustrates that everyone must be held accountable and that punishment will always catch up. However, there have been cases where convicts managed to hide, and perhaps they are living a happy life somewhere else under a different name even now. Hans Fricke, the voice of Nazi propaganda. It was through his lips that fascist press spoke. This is Hans Fricke speaking. This is Hans Fricke speaking. These were the words that opened the Third Reich's main weekly broadcast. Since 1942, by the personal choice of Minister Joseph Goebbels, Fricke assumed this position. This is why he found himself at the Nuremberg trials. The purpose of the Nuremberg trials was to prosecute the leaders of Nazi Germany, and Fricke, always following the orders of others, appeared as an unusual suspect there. Furthermore, his activities were never directly related to the violence or weapon production. The wording of his punishment was as follows: Hans Fricke, by his passionate support of the regime, paralyzed the population's ability for independent judgment. This statement is accurate, and he would have deserved punishment for it, but not when truly horrific deeds are being condemned. As a result, based on the charges considered at the Nuremberg trials, Fricke was found not guilty. As a journalist, Fricke sometimes made strong statements of a propagandistic nature, but the tribunal does not consider that they were aimed at directly inciting the German people to commit atrocities against other nations. It cannot be said that the accused was involved in the crimes, reads the resolution. It was this formulation that allowed Hans Fricke to escape severe punishment. It's worth noting that he genuinely did not commit those horrific crimes or incite others to do so. If the previous character was a minor player, the next one laid the economic foundation of Nazi Germany. But where did they disappear to, and why is almost nothing known about them? Answering this question is difficult, especially considering the options available to the Third Reich for salvation. In the rainforest strip of South America, a refuge supposedly built by the Nazis in the early 1940s has been discovered. On the building's wall is a giant swastika, and everything is ready to welcome guests. But there are no traces of how the Nazis managed to reach their final sanctuary in the world's wilderness. Even Hitler's elite submarine, the U-3523, was of no use. In May 1945, the British sank it, and how they did it gave rise to legend. Due to an error in transmitting data from a Royal Air Force bomber, the remnants of the U-3523 were searched for in another part of the seafloor and couldn't be found until 2018. Rumors about the Führer's last ship allegedly taking Nazis away from Europe and then disappearing from radar stirred minds worldwide. The submarine still hasn't been raised. Who could have been hiding on board at the time of its demise is still unknown. On April 30, 1945, Hitler ended his life, but rumors that he might have escaped emerged immediately. The reason was the poor condition of the body, which the Nazi leader himself ordered to be burned. When partisans hanged Benito Mussolini 2 days earlier, they had desecrated the fascist Duce's body. Hitler was afraid his remains would be defaced, so he ordered them to be disfigured. It was never conclusively established whether Hitler perished or not. Hitler's personal secretary Martin Bormann may have also managed to escape. In May 1945, Hitler entrusted his last will to him. Bormann, the only one from Hitler's inner circle to maintain his composure, managed to leave the Führer's bunker in an attempt to escape Soviet encirclement. Pursuers could not locate the fugitive. On November 20, 1945, he was tried in absentia and sentenced to death. A version emerged that could neither be confirmed nor refuted. A Nazi intelligence service officer, Reinhard Gehlen, published a book claiming that Martin Bormann was a secret agent of Soviet intelligence. This meant that finding him would be impossible. The tracks of the elusive Nazi minister led from the Berlin bunker straight to Moscow.